We are so glad that you've decided to brave the weather and come here today to honor our veterans at Weatherford College. Thank you very much for coming. We're glad every one of you is here, and we're glad the fire marshal is not here today. So, I know that we are disappointed that we were not able to experience the flyover today from the 4 F-16s from the Naval Air Station in Fort Worth, but they called this morning. They just couldn't do it because of the weather, and we hope to have them back at another time. But this is still a very special event, and we are going to adjust to the weather. Normally we're outside at our beautiful Ed Kramer Veterans Flag Plaza that you can see behind me, the flags of the branches of the American Armed Services, and we know that you'll be able to see that and enjoy that here in just a moment. I'd like to start with our opening prayer and like to invite the chaplain of the American Legion Post 16, Rick Ellenberger.
Thank you very much. Would you join me in prayer, please? God, please let every veteran of our nation's armed forces feel truly and appropriately honored by the attention and appreciation of their fellow citizens. Let no one feel forgotten or neglected. Let every man and woman, young and old, feel the deep and enduring gratitude of our nation and its inhabitants. Please turn your gaze to those men and women who in their military service have sacrificed time, comfort, strength, ambition, health, and prosperity for the peace and safety of family and friends of others they've never known. Please reward them 100-fold for all their sacrifices and service. Bless them far beyond their expectation and reward them richly, for they have all given. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Ellenberger. Again, it's a pleasure to have you here. We have a lot of folks we'd love to introduce today, but we're going to keep that kind of short. I do want to especially thank our Gold Star families that are here in front of us today. You mean a great deal to us, and we want to thank you for what y'all have given for this great country of ours. I want to thank all the faculty and staff and students who are here. We would also like to thank Judy Flanagan, who is here representing State Representative Phil King. Senator Pat Fallon is right here. Senator, you can kind of come up and sit right here. Thank you for being here as well, Senator Fallon, and we'll be hearing from him here in just a moment. I would like to welcome the 20th president of Weatherford College, Dr. Todd Allen Farmer. Please welcome him.
Thank you, and thank you, Vice President Baker. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2019 Weatherford College Veterans Day program. With us today are several special guests who are veterans. Please hold your applause until all have been introduced. Joining us today are Weatherford Foundation President Bob Glenn and Ralph Willingham, the man who made all of this possible. I also need to publicly recognize veteran benefactor Ed Kramer for his generous donation that made this beautiful Veterans Flag Plaza Memorial behind us possible. And finally, we are honored by the presence of Senator Pat Fallon and Colonel Thomas McKenzie. WC Board of Trustees joining us today are Vice Chair Sue Cody, Secretary Treasurer Leela Morris, and Judy McAnally. Thank you for all of you being here today. Please join me in not only recognizing these special guests, but all of our honored veterans who are with us today. The Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. appropriately reminds us that freedom is not free. Today we gather to honor all of our veterans who have protected and preserved our national freedom. And today we gather and honor and remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice and laid down their lives in defense of God and country. Weatherford College is celebrating our sesquicentennial year in 2019. Our 150-year history of changing lives would not have been possible without the service of countless numbers of veterans who protected our freedom to both teach and learn. The cornerstone of Weatherford College was laid on July 5th, 1869. I can't help but to think that among those early students, faculty, and staff members were Civil War veterans and those who endured the hardships of that war between the states. During the World War I era, 1917 was the year that United States declared war and the year that Weatherford College first admitted women. Later, in 1942, during World War II, Weatherford College suspended our football program for the duration of the war due to the absence of men. In the Vietnam era, Weatherford College began teaching classes at Fort Walters and Mineral Wells in the fall of 1963. 95% of the GI helicopter pilots in the Vietnam War were trained at Fort Walters in the United States Army Primary Helicopter School. Many became WC students. Weatherford College has also sent her sons and daughters to serve in military conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and around the world. I would like to briefly mention a few of the most distinguished Weatherford College veterans. General William Hood Simpson was born in Weatherford, Texas on May 18, 1888. He attended Weatherford College and ultimately graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in June of 1909. During World War I, Simpson served on the Western Front and was promoted from lieutenant to captain, lieutenant colonel, and ultimately the division chief of staff. He was awarded the Army Distinguished Service Medal and the Silver Citation Star. During World War II, Simpson commanded the U.S. Second Army and later the U.S. Ninth Army. Now as a three-star general, Simpson led his soldiers to fight back in the Battle of the Bulge. Dwight Eisenhower described General Simpson as alert, intelligent, and professionally capable, the type of leader that American soldiers deserve. Another example of a Weatherford College veteran who excelled is Jim Wright. Wright attended Weatherford College and then enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces in December 1941. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Air Corps in 1942. Wright earned a Distinguished Flying Cross while flying combat in B-24 Liberators with the 530th Bomb Squadron in the South Pacific during World War II. He later served as the mayor of Weatherford, was elected to United States Congress, and in 1986 was named Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. In his honor, the library behind us is named Speaker Jim Wright Library. And finally, perhaps Weatherford College's most heroic veteran was Jack L. Knight. Knight was born in Garner, Texas on May 29, 1917. He graduated from Weatherford College in 1938 and joined the Texas National Guard with his brother Curtis on November 18, 1940. Knight served as a first lieutenant in the 124th Cavalry Regiment, Mars Task Force. On February 2, 1945, while fighting in Burma, Knight single-handedly destroyed 2 Japanese pillboxes and killed the occupants of several foxholes. Despite being wounded, he led his rifle platoon in an attack on a 3rd pillbox, but he was struck and blinded by an enemy grenade. Although unable to see, Knight rallied his platoon and continued forward in the assault on the remaining pillboxes. Before the task was completed, he fell mortally wounded. First Lieutenant Knight's gallantry led to the successful elimination of most of the Japanese positions and served as an inspiration to the officers and men of his troop. For his heroic actions, First Lieutenant Knight was awarded the Medal of Honor on June 25, 1945. He was buried at Holders Chapel Cemetery in Cool, Texas. He was later awarded the Texas Legislative Medal of Honor in May of 1999. And on November 11th, 2014, Weatherford College named a building just north of us the Jack L. Knight Building in his honor. Knight's other brother, Major Roy A. Knight, Jr. of the United States Air Force, was shot down on May 19, 1967, while attacking a target on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. Major Knight was initially listed as missing in action until being declared killed in action in 1974. During that time, he was promoted to colonel. 52 years later, on February 2019, Colonel Knight's remains were recovered and identified by personnel assigned to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. Colonel Roy A. Knight, Jr. came home to Texas with a dignified arrival on August 8, 2019. He was flown home by his son, Brian, a captain with Southwest Airlines, to Dallas Love Field, the same airport where 5-year-old Brian said goodbye to his father. When he left 52 years earlier, like many other American families, the Knight family paid a tremendous price to protect our freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom is not free. Today I welcome you to Weatherford College and invite you to join me in honoring all distinguished veterans.
Thank you very much, President Farmer. Now is the time for the presenting of the colors and our national anthem by the Weatherford College Choir.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance Thank you. If you can, please remain standing as we present the flags of the armed services. Tammy Peters will lead us.
Army, Staff Sergeant John Brown. Navy. Petty Officer, Second Class, Jonathan Bogan. Coast Guard, Petty Officer, First Class, Air Force, Elizabeth Jackson. Air Force, Senior Airman Alexis Smith, Air Force. Marine, Corporal Wilson Preston.
Thank you. You may be seated. State Senator Pat Fallon is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, where he played football under the legendary coach Lou Holtz. He was a member of the 1988 National Championship team, and upon graduation, Pat received a commission in the United States Air Force officer and was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls. He is now the president and CEO of the Great American Apparel Company, which designs patriotic clothing lines for great Americans. Pat Fallon has represented North Texans and the Texas legislature since 2013 and currently serves in the Texas Senate. In the March 2018 primary, in a three-way race, he received the Republican nomination, garnering 62% of the vote and more than 34,000 votes than the second place finisher. This was the widest margin of victory against an incumbent in Texas Senate history. He went on to solidly win the general election in November of 2018 with just under 75% of the vote. In January of 2016, Pat took on what has been billed as the world's greatest endurance challenge. In an effort to raise funds and awareness for pediatric cancer research, Pat entered the World Marathon Challenge, a race where competitors attempt to run 7 marathons in 7 days on all 7 continents. On January 29th, 2016, Pat became just the 15th person in the world to successfully complete the challenge and the first and still only person to finish the World Marathon Challenge without having any previous marathon experience. Pat has been married to his lovely wife Susan for 15 years, and they have 2 boys, Thomas 13 and Mac 10. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present Senator Pat Fallon.
When he reminds me of the marathons, it didn't seem fair. 7 marathons and only 2 knees. Well outnumbered. You know, you don't have to be here, and I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank Dr. Farmer and Brent Baker and Colonel McKenzie. I was an Air Force guy, and there's kind of some rivalries between the branches of service. And look at that uniform. The Army uniform is better. It's just so much sharper than the Air Force one was. I'm a little jealous. In fact, when I first ran for office, city council 10 years ago, I was knocking a lot of doors. And this one fellow he was washing his car. And I was about to make my pitch and tell him who I was. And he goes, I know who you are. You're that military fella. And I said, well, worth getting around. And we got to talking a little bit. And he said, he was a Marine, incidentally, for background information. And he said, what branch of the service were you in? And I said, Air Force. And he said, you said you were in the military. So had it been the colonel washing the car, probably would have been the same result. But you don't have to be here. No one's compelling you to be here. And when I walked in that door, I thought it really moved me that there are so many young people here. And I really want to thank everybody for coming, but particularly those young folks, because it is very important. And most of all, to the Gold Star families. 2 years ago on the day, you wake up in the morning, and what do you do nowadays? It's Facebook, at least for me. And I see, 2 years ago today, I met John and Carol Savage. And there was a great picture when we met, because there was a parade that day, and you were in the Gold Star float. And I went up and I visited with y'all, and they become dear friends. And to have them sitting literally right here in front is just wonderful. What a treat for me. And thank you for being here. The Senate district that we live in is 14 counties. It's 105 cities and 111 school districts. And I'm going to beg your forgiveness because I'm going to have to leave this ceremony early because as you may imagine, when you represent a district where you have people that believe in things greater than themselves, that God is greater, that our country is greater, that our friends, our families, our communities are greater than we are, there are a lot of Veterans Day ceremonies today. And I do have to leave for a few more. But I wanted to come here because Parker County has meant so much to our office and so much to me personally. And I couldn't miss this. And I want to thank you for that. When my grandmother died in the mid-90s, in 1996, her husband, my grandfather, had passed the year before. And many people in this room have had to do what my parents and our family did, which was we had to go to the house and we had to clear it because it was going to be sold. And this is very, moving experience for my father and his 3 brothers because they had grown up in that home. Very small home in a small town, from a small town, incidentally, just northeast of Dallas called Pittsfield, Massachusetts. But I sought political asylum in the Republic of Texas. I got as fast as I could. And so we had piles. And I think a lot of people do it this way. You have a pile for, things that are going to be thrown out, a pile that you're going to give away, and then a pile that you're going to keep. And for some odd reason, I felt this magnetic pull to the pile that was going to be thrown out. Pile of garbage. And I leafed through it. And it was a pile of garbage, save one box of old photographs that somebody mistakenly put in the wrong pile. And our Irish ancestors came over during the famine in the 1840s, so we had some photos from the 19th century. I mean, people that have come before you. And I leafed through them, and this is my dad's family, but my mother, who's a 5'1", it's Italian lady, knows who everyone is, and my dad doesn't have a clue. So when I would ask, who's this, who's that, my mom was the one that would tell me what's what. And I came across this photo of this strappingly handsome man that looked out of central casting from Hollywood. He was in an Army Air Corps uniform when we were the same branch, sir. And I said, "Who's this?" And my dad goes, "Oh." And my mom said, and she gave him a little slap on the shoulder. "Tom, that's Jim Gallagher. That's your cousin." It was my dad's cousin once removed. And I said, "Well, Mom, what happened to him? I've never heard of him." Well, he served in World War II, and he was part of a bomber crew that in 1943 had been shot down and killed. And he was 20 years old at the time. He wasn't married, he didn't have any children, and with the passage of time in 50 years, he was almost forgotten. But I had that magnetic pull. Now, some people would say that's a coincidence. I think it's more like a God wink. That something drove me to find that box of photos and him. And the reason I wanted to share that story with you today on Veterans Day of all days is I think a lot of our families have a Jim Gallagher in them. And I like, when I do these visits, I like to say his name, Jim Gallagher, as many times as possible. So it won't be forgotten. So it will live in the breath of the air of today. And, you know, when you're around so many great people, like Earl King is here, and his story is one that I probably can't tell you without getting emotional, because he won't tell you. Earl is, I don't know, in the neighborhood, 87 years young, give or take a few years. And, you know, when he was 12 years old, he had to leave his family to work. It's a different time then. As a 12-year-old, his childhood ended. And he was a laborer, working 12, 13, 14 hours a day, because that's what they had to do in their family, because it was so big. And then when he came of age, he entered the United States Navy. And a naval officer family, because I saw this picture. I found this whole story out. He wouldn't tell me. I was in his office, and I asked him, "Who's this family? Or who are these people?" This a captain in 06 in the Navy, and his wife and Earl. Well, they had kind of adopted him unofficially and guided him. And as a Navy enlisted man, he eventually got his degree and commission, and then, God forbid, became an attorney. And is currently one of my dear friends in Parker County. But that's the kind of thing, and I'm so glad, again, the young people are here. Count our blessings, because we're living the life that our ancestors dreamed. So I just want to thank you again. And, you know, we need to do this every day. It's just in our hearts. We don't have to gather together, and this is a lovely ceremony. But you're not a good Jew if you just seek atonement on Yom Kippur. And you're not a good Christian if you just worship and honor, love thy neighbor, and honor Jesus Christ if you just do it on Christmas and Easter. And you're not a good or great American if you just remember our veterans and those who gave everything, if you just remember them on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. We need to do it every day. And that's why this district and this state is so special, because we never forget, and more importantly, we always remember. So thank you very much for coming. Please forgive me. And Colonel, I want to hear your speech. I want to watch it on video. Thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Senator Fallon, you said we didn't have to be here. You really didn't have to be here today, because you came 2.5 hours from his home up in Collin County, and now he's going back another 2.5 hours. He came here just for that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Fallon. Appreciate you. Yes. Well, it's my great honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Thomas McKenzie, retired United States Army Colonel. Dr. McKenzie's story is fascinating, and because of time, I will just give you just a handful of highlights before we bring him to the podium. Dr. McKenzie enlisted in the Army in 1967, his senior year of high school, at the height of the Vietnam War. After basic training, he was trained to fly helicopters at Fort Walters in Mineral Wells, as President Farmer mentioned. In Vietnam, at the age of 18, he was shot down multiple times by enemy fire, earning 2 Bronze Stars, 27 Air Medals, and other commendations. He left the Army in 1971 to work for the Weatherford Police Department and began his studies at Weatherford College while working full-time. He graduated in 1977. Also graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington in 1979 and enrolled in the Baylor College of Dentistry. He then re-enlisted in the Army to become an oral and maxillofacial surgeon. He, his wife Nancy, and their children began an adventure, living in places like South Korea, Hawaii, Missouri, Washington, and Louisiana. Over time, he was promoted many times, including to the position of commander of the Western Regional Dental Command. He was in charge of all of the units on the West Coast, from Alaska to California and all the way to El Paso. He also served as consultant to the Surgeon General. He retired from the Army after 33 years of service, adding 3 Legions of Merit, the Humanitarian Service Award, and other honors to his trophy case. After a short stay in private practice in Wisconsin, he and Nancy retired earlier this year and moved back to their home, Weatherford, Texas. Weatherford College is very pleased to be a part of his impressive story. Please welcome Dr. Thomas McKenzie.
Well, thank you for coming. I'm really not that impressive. Just, lots of time in the Army and lots of jobs. So Dr. Ford, Brent, Bob Glenn, it's an honor to be asked to say a few words here. This is an outstanding event, and I appreciate all of the people that I see in here who come to honor the veterans. I started at Weatherford College, and like you said, I worked as a police officer here in Weatherford for 7 years or 6.5 years, something like that. And that's about how long it took me to get my 2-year degree, because you work and you work and you work and you go to school and you go to school, and it's difficult. So I got my first academic degree here after high school, and I can't praise the college enough. If you told me I'd be giving a speech here 42 years later, I would have thought maybe you were smoking some of that funny weed I hear about around the country. This is the 150th year celebration of the college, and no, I wasn't in the first class, but what I learned here prepared me for my 14 plus years of higher education. And I served in the Army as a private, I served in the Army as a colonel, and all the ranks in between just about. So I've met presidents, I've met senators, I've met secretaries of defense, I've met very, very influential people in my position. But you know who I like? I like the soldier, or the airman, or the Navy person. My career spanned 44 years with a break in between to go to school. So I was in a combat specialty in the beginning, and then I was part of the Army Medical Department after that. I was a brand new oral maxillofacial surgeon, and later became the chief of oral and maxillofacial surgery in the Army, and as Brent said, the consultant to the Surgeon General. I worked in many joint assignments with other military services. I wish the senator was still here. I would tell some jokes, but I'll refrain. I worked in many joint assignments, and I found out we're all alike. You know, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Army. We all have the same things. We all work together. We all have the same mission. But it was the soldier, the airman, the sailor, the Marine, the Coast Guardsman that I treasured the most during my time in the military. That's who I really enjoyed meeting and working with. And in my capacity, I was able to help a lot of them. When I retired in 2012, someone gave me a little plaque that I still have. And it just hung it in my office. I thought it was kind of cute, you know. I just hung it in my office, and what it says is, "Land of the free because of the brave." It sat in my office for quite a while. I was in Wisconsin for 7 years, and it sat there on my desk, and I look at it every once in a while, and then one day I said, you know what? There's a lot of wisdom and a lot of deep words in this little plaque that I have. We are who we are because of what so many men and women did for us so many years ago, all the way up till today. We are the land of free, and my hope is that we can continue to be the land that people around the world aspire to become. Armistice Day was celebrated to commemorate the end of World War I. The hostilities ceased on the 11th month, the 11th day, and the 11th hour in 1918. And for you history buffs, they still bombed each other until nightfall, but then they quit. And the formal peace agreement was the Treaty of Versailles, which didn't happen until the next year. But this day, this hour, this is was celebrated as Armistice Day. During World War II, many of the nations changed the name of the celebration to Remembrance Day, or in the U.S., Veterans Day. It was officially changed in 1954 by an act of Congress. My wife and I were very recently, actually, in Europe, and we came across a gentleman who knew I had been in the military. I guess I looked like it or something, I don't know, but he picked me out and he said he was just recently standing outside of a cemetery in France, a U.S. military cemetery in France. And a man approached him and asked him if he was an American. And in his French-English accent, started to weep. And he said, all of these people in this graveyard came here to help me and my family and my country. And you need to go back to America and tell them, all of them, how grateful that they are, that they saved this country. It was quite a moving experience for him, and just for us to just listen to him talk about it was pretty neat. Veterans Day is a day set aside to honor all veterans who served in the United States Armed Forces and were honorably discharged at the completion of their service. This is a day to say thank you formally to those valuable men and women who have served this great country. Veterans are people who answered the call. They stood up and they held the flag high. No matter what the sacrifice is, it's worth it to continue to have the country that we know and love. What does it take to serve your country in the military? It takes determination, it takes pride, it takes sacrifice, and it takes drive to serve others by putting the mission above yourself. How does this drive become a reality in a young man or woman? It's hard to tell that, but in my experience, it came from my family. My dad was in the military. He was in the Coast Guard during World War II. My two uncles were both in the Navy. One was in the Navy during World War II, and the other was in the Korean War. It's a matter of pride in our house, and they talked that way. They talked about that, and my uncle, who is 94, in assisted living, he talks about it today every time I'm with him. He talks about his time in the war. So they always spoke highly. I also ran into lots of people over the years that said, oh, I was in the military when I was, first out of medical school, or I was first out of dental school, or I first did this, and that was the best 4 years of my life. I loved it. And then I had to come out and make money, I guess. So the other thing that I think that really leads people to the military are world events. And those world events, as we all know, 9/11 was one huge event in our lifetime that really brought people to the recruiters. They were overwhelmed because people wanted to join and they wanted to do their part in the military. So I entered the military a month after I graduated from high school, and I wanted to serve my country and do my part. America is the best country on earth because of people who are willing to sacrifice for the rights we hold dear. While serving, I went from a naive 17-year-old boy who went to basic training and then to flight school and then straight to Vietnam and then came back as a 19-year-old grown-up man. It was definitely an experience that changed my life, and it changed how I looked at life. I definitely saw how dedicated our veterans were and are, and how much it took to stand up against evil. I saw tremendous sacrifice daily by our troops. While in Vietnam, I never saw a serviceman not ready or able to do his job. Think about that, you know. You're going to go out and you're going to lie in the swamps of Vietnam for the next 5 days to 2 weeks or whatever, and you're there, you're going to do it, and you're ready. And that's what they did. I returned to Fort Walters as an instructor, meeting with young men, student pilots, and they were still men then, but lots of women in the military now. But they were student pilots. And it was an eye-opening experience for me because when I got there, I just went through it and did it and whatever. But these men loved their country and were happy to accept their next assignment, which they all knew was Vietnam. We all had trepidations before we went to Vietnam, and many did not come back. Yet we all continued to uphold the flag and spirit of the United States of America. That dedication is what I encountered throughout my military career. I spent my years in the military, first as a pilot, and then later as an oral maxillofacial surgeon. I learned the heart and drive of young men and women serving their country. To most, it was not a job, it was a calling. Serving my country is something that is dear to me, and I found out I was not alone in that feeling. My oral maxillofacial surgery peers were making 10 times the salary I was in the Army, but it didn't matter to me. I was doing what I was supposed to do. I had a skill which I could make their lives improve dramatically, and I needed to continue to help them. I pushed my practice toward facial reconstructive surgery because that's what I saw the need was coming back from the war. Our generation coined the term wounded warrior, these people who were hurt doing what was right and serving their country. All wars had wounded warriors, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and on and on. I heard recently that the United Kingdom had 19,000 wounded warriors 4 years after the end of World War I, still in hospitals. These men and women are the backbone of the combat veteran. While stationed at Brooke Army Medical Center, I saw thousands of wounded warriors come to the medical center fresh from the combat zone, and I mean fresh. The Air Force did a tremendous job. A kid would be lying on the streets of Baghdad, wounded, and within 48 hours, he was in my hospital in San Antonio. That's incredible. And that's what made so many of them live. So they came fresh from the combat zone looking for hope of returning to a normal life after severe wounds in Iraq and Afghanistan. Almost without exception, these young people came with pride and hope and looking to be normal again. They were not bitter or complaining service members. They were taking their lot in life in stride and continuing on, knowing what they did was what they wanted to do, what they chose to do, and what was right for America. We also owe a tremendous amount of gratitude to the spouses and children and families of our veterans who spent months and years with their loved ones away. While serving at Fort Polk as the commander and a senior leader, my wife Nancy and I helped the families with their daily challenges of being separated. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment was deployed from Fort Polk to Iraq. When their year of deployment was coming up, they went and moved all of their stuff to Kuwait. Probably some of you remember this. The war got really bad again, and they said, you guys have got to go back. So they never came home. They were in there a year, went to Kuwait, and were sent back to the war because it had escalated. The families who we were with were devastated, but knew it was the right thing to do. They were deployed for 18 months without seeing their families. I remember the 2nd ACR commander's wife, who was a very dear friend of ours, who lived right next to us, telling me that she would continue on because she knew her husband was doing the right thing and he was the right man for that job. We saw this attitude over and over again until the soldiers returned. Knowing that their loved ones were being taken care of back home allowed the service members also to focus on their job. I now see a lot of veterans in the civilian workforce. When they talk about the service, you can see the pride they have. Our son Cliff went in the Army, he spent 6 years as a tank officer, and now our grandson is at Texas A&M. I don't know why, but he's at Texas A&M. And he's in the Corps of Cadets, and he wants to have a military career also. So my son lost friends in the war in Iraq, but he always talks about what they were doing and how proud they would be of what they accomplished. My message to you today is service to your country takes sacrifice and determination. Until you're there, you don't really know how much sacrifice there really is, but it's tremendous. With these traits, sacrifice and determination, our country will continue to be the democracy we know and enjoy. I say thank you to our veterans that are here, to all of our soldiers and Air Forcemen and Marines and sailors and Coast Guardsmen. I say thank you for what you have done for America, and because of you, America will continue to be the best.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKenzie. You know, Dr. McKenzie and his wife just completed a lengthy trip to Europe and got home at about 9 o'clock last night, I understand. So you didn't have to be here either. We really appreciate you being here and making this even more special. I'd like to invite Toby Hutchison up, current Weatherford College student, with an original song he wrote called Full Metal Soldier.
With the Lord looking over his shoulder, had his head falling 10 feet over. He's not looking for a four-leaf clover, didn't know he was gonna be a soldier. Pouring rain on a summer day, he didn't know that his life was gonna change. Life can be crazy, but life's okay. Things will always change. Life will always change on a summer day. He's in Iraq taking enemies attack, knowing that his wife really wants him back. Scared, getting older and older, while the Lord's looking over their shoulders. In his shoulder, not swings with change, gunfire, smoke fades, and the heart breaks. 3 years to step back, memories fade, but the love stays. Knock swings with change, gunfire, smoke fades, and the heart breaks.
Thank you.
Great job, Toby. Thank you very much. Now is the time to present our Veterans Day wreath. Hunter Burt on the bagpipes, and Tammy Peters will have the reading of our Parker County fallen heroes as well as the playing of taps.
I want to thank the Gold Star families for being our guests today, and I'd like to read off our fallen heroes of Parker County. Like Senator Pat Ballin says, we don't want to forget them, so we say their name. Navy Petty Officer, 3rd Class, Clayton Beecham. Army Private, 1st Class, Austin Staggs. Army Staff Sergeant Jeffrey Hartley. Army Sergeant John Savage. Army National Guard Sergeant Anthony Mason. Marine Corporal James McRae. Army Private, 1st Class Paul Vallet, Jr. And Army Sergeant Curtis Oakes. Thank you.
Are you glad you came today? We're glad you came too. Yes. Would you please give Ralph Willingham and Tammy Peters a big hand for putting all this together? Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Veterans Day. Thank you.